Do you start from Ukraine, the Second Cold War? In second words, is the current nation establishing a new global division whose conflicts extend from the fields of geopolitics to economics, culture, and ideology, on the model of the First Cold War? The course of events and the impossibility of reaching compromise solutions give the impression that whether Ukraine was subjected to a Russian invasion or diplomatic efforts succeeded in dissuading the Kremlin from undertaking this adventure, this country will be a major confrontation ground between the two sides of the emerging Cold War. Something similar to what happened in Berlin in 1948 when Soviet forces laid siege to the city, or when the wall separating East and West Berlin was built in 1961, and in Cuba during the missile crisis in 1962. Berlin and Cuba determined the maximum limits that the parties to the conflict could reach, and established understandings whose breach would be the beginning of a full-blown nuclear war. Then the two sides turned to using the arenas of Korea, Vietnam, and the Middle East as side battlefields to vent the international tension. The arms race, ideological match, and economic growth added to the global competition that ended with the fall of one of the most prominent symbols of the Cold War, the Berlin Wall in 1989. From this perspective, the Russian position that demands security guarantees that, if offered, would change the political structure of NATO, should be addressed. But does Moscow have the tools to force a review of the results of the First Cold War before launching a second war? President Vladimir Putin has been working for years to achieve a strategic position for his country based on a reading that says that the West has entered the stage of decadence and is unable to respond to the major challenges posed by phenomena such as the rise of China or the structural crisis of Western capitalism and the social disparities and internal conflicts it brings, including the issues of refugees and migrants. On the other hand, this reading neglects the inclusion of the alternative global ideal among what must be available in the symbolic arsenal that Putin and his allies will have to offer, similar to the socialist and Marxist ideology that formed a motive for the support of peoples and large social segments for the Soviet project, at least between the 20s and 50s of the last century. Before its glow dissipates, it may not be difficult for Russia to say that its global model is ready, contrary to what its opponents claim. It can be summed up in a strong state whose citizens decide the form of government in isolation from Western dictates and ready-made models promoted by supporters of non-governmental organizations. There is no doubt that such a speech will be listened to by a significant number of countries, in Europe, and abroad. His reception of one of the most prominent figures of this kind, Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro, who is considered one of the right-wing populist hawks in Latin America, and at the height of the military preparations around Ukraine, is only a sign that supporters of freedom from Western tutelage over the internal policies of countries are not rare. For its part, the West wants to appear as a united force capable of repelling the attempt to overthrow the fait accompli that it established with its victory in the Cold War. Speakers at the Munich Security Conference in the past 2 days stressed the rejection of Russian pretexts and accused Putin of creating the current crisis and of being responsible for the tense atmosphere that Europe has witnessed since 2014, when his forces invaded the Crimea, resuming the language of threats and armed intimidation as a tool for communication on the continent. The most difficult question in the current context is that of China. If Beijing publicly and implicitly supports all of Putin's steps in confronting the West on the Ukraine issue, its involvement in a Cold War against the West appears to be deeply suspicious. The Chinese economy is immeasurably more intertwined with the West and the world in general than its Russian counterpart. And the extent of the damage that may be inflicted on him as a result of an open political and economic clash is greater than what will be inflicted on Russia. Accordingly, Chinese calculations will differ, even though the Chinese project at the Asian and global levels is not very far from Putin's ambitions, as it has become known. In addition, the diplomatic support that Beijing provides to Moscow has not yet been tested in the conditions of a harsh conflict with the West. The unprecedented sanctions that U.S. officials threaten to inflict on Russia are designed to isolate the latter from the international arena, but this is the theoretical perception. The Russians and the Chinese are betting